What's up, friends? It's Haley, aka Bird,
and Randy,
and you're tuning in to the Give 'em the Bird podcast.
This podcast is all about challenging what it means to be healthy and fit. It's about celebrating sustainable behavior change and non-scale victories.
And most importantly, it's about giving the bird to the diet industry and societal expectations of body size. Why? Well, because at the end of the day, you have an entire life to live that does not require your body look a certain way.
Thanks for tuning in.
Now, let's give 'em the bird. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to GTB. Today's episode is kind of a part 2 from last week. So last week we talked about kind of some signs or like red flags of an unhealthy relationship with exercise or movement. And now we are talking about, okay, we noticed some of those things. What the heckity heck do we do with them? So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, maybe go back, listen to it, and then come back to this one once you get through there. But I would say if you notice some of those red flags, the first thing to do is pause. Pause with your exercise a little bit. Like let it just kind of take a little break from it. Especially if the idea of a break is startling to you. I think, taking a break is a good thing, and allowing you to like reflect a little bit on your relationship. So pausing, I think, is numero uno, a very good thing to do right off the bat. And with that is coming up, I know, Randy, with your relationship with exercise, I'm curious, is that something that you did when you noticed that your relationship wasn't like the healthiest, or what was the route that you kind of took?
I don't know that I paused right away. I think I focused more initially on my relationship with food, and kind of kept the exercise going for a while, because for me, the exercise was never about body size, but it was more that identity piece that we talked about last week.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, once I kind of you helped me kind of realize that, when we did the GTB Academy. And so I think that's the point where, yeah, when I finally realized that that was the case, I did kind of take a little bit of a step back, or at least mentally reevaluated. Even if I was still going, I was definitely more conscious of like, yeah, what it means for me and my identity. And if I do take a break, like, how does that make me feel?
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think, at least mentally breaking from like, and taking time to think about it, I guess is what I did for sure.
And I think that is a really good thing to do, whether it's like a mental break or a physical break. And I will say that if you are someone who is really, really struggling, like I've worked with some folks who, when they take a break, their nervous system goes a little haywire because they have been really relying on exercise as a way of like emotional regulation or like nervous system regulation, which I know is kind of like a buzzword, but so it can be like, depending upon where you're at with your relationship and how, even with food too, I definitely think it can be helpful to get support with that. Like if you do take an actual pause and you notice like really a lot of anxiety or like a really big drop in mood, things like that, I would definitely say big red flag. I know we talked about red flags last week, but really good indicator of like, okay, instead of just breaking on my own, I think maybe I need to work with someone to do this. And obviously I'm a huge advocate for working with a therapist, like you and me both, like, amen, love them, pay them more. But at the same time, I recognize that's not the most accessible thing for everybody, unfortunately. And it takes so long to get in with therapists. So yeah, taking some sort of break, whether it's a mental break or a physical break, I think is really important. And just to give you an idea of like, okay, well, how long do I break for? For some people, it can be like a week. I have one client that I'm meeting with who she's coming off of like a year-long break of structured exercise. And I just met with her today and we were reflecting on wow, all the shifts that have happened in her life since being able to break. And she's in such a much better place that she's actually ready to maybe start exploring the idea of like structure around exercise, which is super duper exciting that she's gotten to that place.
Mhm.
Um, but breaking. And I think a break can also look like implement some goddamn rest days. if you don't
Yeah, for
if
sure.
you don't currently have rest days, which again is kind of a red flag, um, throw some in there. Like even like I think for some people the idea of taking a break is so scary because it's not structured and they need that structure around exercise, which is
Sure.
problematic, but like let's meet you where you're at. I don't want to just completely change everything for you and you feel way worse and then, all of that happen.
Hmm.
So, if taking a full-blown break from exercise feels like too much, can you have structured rest days? So it's like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. Those are my rest days. That's my structure. Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, I can still do my workout,
Hmm.
whatever, but get some structured breaks in there. Like that can be a smooth transition into finding more flexibility with your movement. So rest days
Hmm.
are important. And the ironic thing is that you'll probably see performance improvements in athletic performance by taking rest days.
Oh,
Yes.
interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like there's so many people who they'll work out, they'll say like I work out 6 days a week. I have one rest day a week or maybe two rest days, but they're still like engaging in activity on those days, but it just doesn't
Hmm.
quote unquote count as exercise.
Sure.
Our body really does require that break from exercise in order to rebuild our muscles, in order to just find like homeostasis again.
Hmm.
And we always say, or I always say, like for students or for people who feel like the more I'm in the gym the more I'm gonna get fit and ripped. You don't build muscle in the gym, you really build it while you sleep, and you
Right.
have to have that time away from the gym in order for those muscles to repair and rebuild.
Yep.
Um, and for some people, like if you look at when we program a strength program or create a strength program, a lot of times we will program in, well, you always should, deload weeks or off weeks.
Hmm.
That's an intentional week or longer where your intensity is like at 50% or lower. So you are doing way less than you normally do, or maybe you're taking like totally a week off, things like that.
Hmm.
And chances are you're going to come back stronger, faster, feel a whole lot better mentally. So yes, breaks
Hmm.
within the plan are important. Breaks between, you know, every like 5 weeks, 6 weeks are really important. Rest is just real crucial. And if we
Yeah.
can't rest, yeek,
Yeah.
you know?
The it's interesting. The gym that my husband goes to goes in like 8 week cycles, and then there's like 2 to 3 weeks in between. And of course, they encourage like you should still come,
Right.
but he really does take that time kind of off. He'll do a workout here or there, but and he's never said this, but he's done it repeatedly throughout the cycle. So I think it really does kind of refresh him and make him feel better going into like that next 8 weeks,
Yeah.
because he's had that time to rest. And he gives himself a day off every week,
Hmm.
just to like go out to dinner with the family because he's usually working out in the evenings. And so it's not only like physical benefits of the rest, but also, more time to devote to other things. So
Yes,
yeah, I
absolutely.
like that.
Yeah, I like how that's baked into their programming. That's a really
Mhm.
good idea.
Mhm.
So rest is important. I think another thing, and again, this is kind of if you're at a place where you can kind of start pushing back on some of the rules and whatnot, is do just that, like push back. I know we talk about like when you notice that inner critic voice, first step is identifying it and noticing it. Next
Mhm.
step is, if you can, you know, push back on it a little bit. And I think that can be the same thing with exercise. So, for example, if you feel like you have to walk for 30 minutes, um, some people might have where it has to be like I've worked with people who it has to be a certain speed, a certain incline, like everything has to be
Mhm.
very specific. Challenge that. What happens if you go for 28 minutes? and you
Mm-hmm.
don't finish out the other 2 minutes. Like, try it out. It's kind of like that exposure therapy of it's like, we're going to try this thing, we're going to get used to it. And then over time, we're going to realize, like, oh, I don't have to work out for this specific amount of time. Like, I can modify it. And
Right.
that adds in flexibility. Like, that allows us to be flexible human beings who have
Yep.
other things to do outside of working out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think challenging those rules a little bit can be really, really helpful. Um, I think another thing too that comes up for me is for a lot of people who realize their relationship with exercise is unhealthy, they might notice that they're really tied to numbers. So whether that be, like, I know last week, Randy, you mentioned like putting your watch on kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or for some people, it might be like, I have to, walk on a treadmill because I have to know how many calories I burned, or like the distance that I went. Like, I have to know the
Mhm.
specifics. Um, can you remove some of those numbers somehow? Can you go for your walk, do your workout without your watch on? Can you
Mhm.
instead walk around the track instead of walking on the treadmill? So I think creating some space, and again, what we're just trying to do is allow for more flexibility. Like, you are literally doing the exact same thing, whether you're on a treadmill or you're on a track. You just don't know how many calories you burned, which, like, the treadmill calorie counter is pretty freaking inaccurate anyways.
Right.
you know?
Right. Yep.
So yeah, a lot of that challenging that we talk about.
Yeah, and being okay with being a little bit uncomfortable because, yeah, like your first walk without your watch is probably going to be kind of uncomfortable for you if that's something that you're tied to. So
Hmm.
giving yourself time to kind of work through that.
Yeah. And maybe it's like, okay, for the last 5 minutes of my walk, I'm going to take my watch off. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
could be, which I think it probably is still going to count your steps, but like, just the idea of it,
Yeah.
little, and
Hmm.
that's another thing that I mentioned too, is make changes slowly.
Hmm.
For some people, they have to kind of drastically cut out exercise. Yeah, we're talking about people who are diagnosed with an eating disorder, and like,
Sure.
we're talking life or death, almost literal situation, right? It's like, it is not safe for you to engage in exercise at this point, and it's like a hard
Hmm.
no. Um, but making changes slowly to your exercise, so maybe whether that's like decreasing slowly or challenging those rules slowly. If you decide to take a break from exercise, I also recommend reintegrating slowly. So,
Hmm.
say you took like 2 weeks off of your structured, well, actually, no, we'll say like a month off. You took like a month off of your structured exercise. Don't just jump right back into the routine that you were out. Like, don't take a break just to say you took a break. Make it meaningful, right? So instead of going back to your running 3 days per week for 30 minutes or whatever it might be, maybe we start with a 10-minute walk every day, right? So like, we're
Hmm.
slowly reintegrating it back in. And again, that's really helpful for people who have actively taken a break. And that could even be I mean, kind of off topic a little bit, but even if you took a break for reasons other than red flags in your relationship with exercise, like if you were, because of a job change and you moved and you haven't been able to
Right.
work out in a structured way in a several months, like, slowly get back into it. That's just always a good rule of thumb after an extended period of time off.
Yep. Yep. Or, if you want to go back to a structured program or a class setting, doing things at 50 to 75%, whatever you might
Yep.
recommend as the professional, but, allowing yourself to not do things at 100% like maybe you used to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, I am living in that right now, being postpartum.
Hmm.
The program that I'm following, I mean, it was like an 8 week postpartum program. Not that you start it right after, right after
Right,
you
right,
pop out the baby. Um, it's recommended to start like between 6 to 8 weeks postpartum. But I was just like reading the program in more detail, and it's like, you shouldn't be hitting weight equivalents of pre-pregnancy. And I'm like, well, shit, I just bench press that same amount as I used to. Like,
right. Yep.
oopsies. But it's also been a lot longer than 8 weeks for me because I've been going a lot slower. But yeah, so reintegrating slowly. Another thing that I think is really, really helpful, if you notice relationship with exercise ain't too hot, um, maybe you took a break, or maybe you didn't take a break, but you're like, I'm still ready to make some changes. Start with, what the heck sounds fun to me? what do I
Mhm.
enjoy? Like what what sounds good to me to move?
Yep.
Especially if, you know, the question that I asked in last week's episode of if you find yourself saying no to, if I knew my body would never change, would I continue exercising this way? If you say
Mhm.
no to it, okay, well, then how would you exercise? And then go do that. Like, go try
Yeah.
that out. Um, and that's really getting at making it about joyful movement, you know, finding enjoyment and fun in what we do. And the ironic thing is that we actually get a heck of a lot more out of movement, primarily like the mental side of things. We get a lot more of those psychological benefits if we start from a place of movement that we like versus I'm going to go to this class that's like super intense and like I do feel better afterwards, but like, oh, it's a bitch to get me to go there. And like every week I like drag my feet kind of thing. We really sometimes we don't reap all those psychological benefits that we get from exercise if we're having
Right.
to force ourselves to do it.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Yes.
Um, and so I was thinking too about like a lot of these I feel like pertain to people who maybe are more rigid about exercise, but then um, I think about people, well, kind of like me, who are taking an extended break from exercise, but have maybe too many rules around what counts.
Mm.
And so, I guess I'm curious what you might recommend for them. My thought is maybe, just doing something, anything, whether you think it counts or not,
Yeah.
um, and kind of see how you feel and that. Like I could easily just go for a walk, even though I might initially think it isn't going to count, but
Yes.
it's not going to hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that is totally good. Again, starting from a place of what sounds good for me right here in this moment.
Hmm.
For some people too, we start with, and I'm careful about this and I'll explain why, but we start thinking of what are ways that I can just add more movement to my day. Um,
Hmm.
and for example, like, can I break up my sedentary time? Can I, you know, use a restroom on a different floor of the building? Or can I walk to go get my mail rather than drive down to the post office, whatever it might be? You can tell I have a P.O. box. Like, we don't have a, we got to walk to get a mail. um, and I'm careful about that because that can very easily run right back into any opportunity I get to move to burn calories, I'm going to do it. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
next thing we know, we're like doing calf races in the shower. Like, that's what I always say because I found myself there many a time. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think just trying it out. And I think
Hmm.
that for so many people who have been so rigid with exercise or, you know, and then they like yourself, like you do take an extended break, we like don't even know what we like. And we
Hmm.
kind of do this with food too, where it's like, this is just I've always eaten things this way. You know, I've never tried it any other way. And when we take away some of those rules and some of that structure, it allows us to find out like what do I actually like? What actually tastes good to me? What actually feels good? Like what type of movement actually feels good for me and my body?
Right.
Um and it allows us to be more creative and like explore more with movement. Like there are so many different ways to move our body and we get so stuck in this is the only thing that quote unquote counts. um
Hmm.
and so yeah, I think again that question of what sounds good to me right now, like what
Yep.
sounds good, you know, and then engaging in it if it's a time where you're able to.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Um, I actually saw a reel on Instagram this morning that made me think of this. It was very timely, knowing that we were recording today. And it was the message was, you know, stop. Oh, what was it? Normalize feeling awkward in the gym. Like
Yeah.
normalize being the new person at the gym, not knowing how to use the equipment, and not feeling weird about it because
Hmm.
everybody's been there at some point.
Hmm.
If you're at the right gym, you'll have people who make you feel welcome and show you how to use everything. And if there's people there who like scoff at you for being new, like who cares? Those aren't the people,
Those
You're
aren't
not there
your people.
for them anyway. So big
Hmm.
deal.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and that's like you know, when we talk about like gym intimidation, that's a huge piece of it is like, you know, everybody started somewhere, and try things out and see how it feels for you and your body, knowing that, you know, what maybe felt good for you before, you are at a different place now where it may not actually feel good for you anymore.
Yeah.
Or what feels good for your favorite fitness influencer or your favorite podcast host, us, may not feel good for you. Right. So, yeah, I love that. Normalize. And I think like normalize not being new and not being good at anything, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's
And
anything that we try for the first time.
yeah, and then the other piece I think that she mentioned in that same bit of content was like also normalize not being in like a matching two-piece set at the gym, which I love those. Like I love seeing people in those. I think they're so cool, but that it ain't me. You know, I'm not showing up like that. So um, I've got my crop tee and you know my leggings from 2 years ago. Like that's
Yes.
what it is, and that's fine.
Yes. It's so funny that you say that because if I work out in at my office where I work in the rec over my lunch break, all of the college students these days are
Mhm.
in matching outfits. How they afford it, don't know. Um, and they're like the same. It's got to be the same brand because they have like the same stitching. And I'm
Of
over
course.
here. I'm wearing one of Tyler's t-shirts. You know, so it's like hanging down, you know, looking like a scuzz. I got my leggings on. They've got some holes in them maybe. My shoes aren't white and pretty. Like I feel so out of place. I'm like, when did we all get cute? Huh?
Right.
And how did it
Where
skip
is my
me?
memo?
None of you told me to look this cute. Like you're all looking real cute up in here, and I'm just looking like as you would say in a previous episode, Randy, a swamp monster.
Swamp monster.
Swamp
Yep.
monster. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes. Um, so yes, I think that that's kind of when we notice some of those red flags, things that we can do, pause and reflect. That pause might be 10 minutes. It might be 2 months, might be a year. Um, depending upon, I don't want to use the word severity, but kind of
Hmm.
depending upon your situation, it might be a good indicator to check in with a mental health professional, talk
Hmm.
more about your relationship with movement, maybe food, your body, etc. When we're ready to reintegrate exercise, whether again that ready is after a 10-minute reflection or after a year, whatever it is, start slowly, challenge some of those rules that we have, broaden our idea of what counts as exercise, um, and really rethink everything, rethink what counts for you.
Hmm.
And I think that's a solid recipe for success.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, as always, you know, if any of you have, you know, something that came up for you while listening to this episode, please share it with us. If you have other recommendations for kind of reintegrating or reevaluating, we would love to hear that. And we will chat with you again next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Give 'em the Bird podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, head on over to Apple iTunes or Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Give 'em the Bird podcast to stay up to date with all things GTB. We'll see you back here next week for another episode, but in the meantime, go give 'em the bird.